Hey everybody, this is Chuck here for deucescrack.com. Welcome to another episode of Beginning Omaha 8. This week we're going to take a little bit of a look at 6 Max Preflop strategy with particular focus on our open raising range from each street. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about why we want to be raising preflop in Omaha 8 or better, discuss our 6 Max opening ranges. We're actually going to focus on the main two spots for opening, which would be under the gun and the button, and then kind of shift to mid position and cut off from there. We'll delve into that more later. And of course, tie that all into some post-flop theory so we can get a better idea of why we're playing the type of hands we are, just to get a firmer grasp on 08 fundamentals and set ourselves up better for post-flop play and post-flop study and practice in the future. So first off, let's talk a little bit about raising in Omaha 8 or better. Now, last week we covered early position preflop play. And when you're talking about early position, I do think there is a pretty decent chunk of hands that one could argue you may want to play for a limp simply because they're too good to fold in a very good game. You can liken them to maybe small pocket pairs in a good live no-limit hold'em game. Like you don't want to play it for a raise, but you still want to play the hand. Now, I think those situations are much fewer and far between in 08 than most people would have you believe. Those of you who watch any of my recent videos or any of my ghost videos ever do see a good amount of open limping from a lot of villains. And, to some degree, that means there is a perception out there or a belief that open limping certain hands in certain spots can be correct. But raising in 08, to me, is ever since I started playing 6 Max 08, I've always been the one raising at the table, and it has done wonders for my win rate, and it really makes the game much more profitable. First and foremost, your opponents can make more mistakes. One unique thing about a limit game is that the size of your mistakes actually can decrease over time. Throughout a hand, right? In no limit hold'em or even in a pot limit game, I could face you with 2-to-1 odds in the river every time, but you can't do that in a limit game. So to some degree, the mistakes become less frequent. Now, when it's already a mistake to be defending a hand pre-flop, that's another mistake our opponent makes. And usually when someone makes a pre-flop mistake, it's compounding. It's a mistake then to play that hand on the flop, turn, and river. So you're just adding more and more mistakes to the opponent. Now, the counter to this, of course, is, well, we can just limp and play the pot and they'll still make the same post-flop mistakes. Well, you're going to win less that way. And also, it's going to be tougher for us to play because our actions, our bets to try to take down a pot, maybe with a barrel, are going to be at a worse price. So it just makes a less profitable environment for us. Another huge advantage to raising in Omaha 8 or better, and this is something you'll get better at with experience, but I always say, and this is much more evident in 4-card games because people are much more transparent just because of the lack of flexibility. In other words, the nuts are the nuts, and people are always fearing the nuts in an Omaha variant. So there's a little bit less malleability, a little bit less aggression. Now, what that means is a lot of players are going to play their best hands in a very face-up way. Now, that'll let us get away from some of our weaker holdings, which is the way I used to approach those situations. Like, oh, that's a raise. I can now lay down something that I know is dominated. But what about when I have a middle-tier hand and I see one of those players limp? Now we should be excited because we're actually playing against the weaker part of their range. So we can push pots and build more equity because in those limp situations, you have less fold equity. We can force people to put more money in behind. In later position, we're going to find ourselves doing that with a wider range, but even out of position, and we'll focus on the blinds in next week's video, we will be able to build pots when our hand is so good, position isn't nearly as important. And finally, image is a very real consideration in any game. You want to be the player pushing people to make decisions over and over again. People stubbornly calling down is one of the biggest leaks possible in Omaha 8 or better. Just never letting go of middle 2 pair. You will never, to say never is obviously false, but it'll be very difficult to profit. And the type of people that people don't fold against are the people always raising. I don't love this last bullet point here. I don't think it's that important, but it's something worth noting, and it's something helpful and another upside to raising. So let's talk a little bit about our 6-max opening ranges. As I mentioned, we're going to focus mainly on under the gun and the button. The unique thing about 4-card games is there's so many different commutations and permutations, over 270,000. It's a lot easier. It's a lot more difficult to break down the 4 cards. So what I find is best, especially in a 6-max situation, is you can have a very firm understanding of what you should be raising on the button and why, what you should be raising under the gun and why, and then make your cutoff range a function of the button and your mid-position range a function of under the gun. And essentially, you've saved yourself a lot of memorization and kind of practice. And more importantly, we will be able to adapt more on future streets, future layouts of the table, so to speak, right? One thing I talked about in the earlier episode was how full ring games are fun in 08 because next thing you know, you're shorthanded 3 minutes later. Players getting up and walking, or players jumping in to try the game, realizing it's 08. I mean, and not PLO. This is maybe specific to online versus live, but all of those things really, I think it's one of the better games to keep yourself on your toes. So I think this approach is going to be much more sound and much more profitable for everyone in the long run. So one thing we are going to have to do, though, because I do want to display a lot of information and give you the full wide range of the types of hands I'm playing from all seats, is we're going to keep using that shorthand I used in the previous episode, where we go through the types of cards we're raising from each seat. Now, that being said, it's important that when you look at shorthand, you assume that all the cards are working together. What do I mean by that? I just want to go over a couple of shorthanded opening ranges that I'm going to express with this shorthand, and then we'll take a look at what that means and really what it doesn't mean. Starting with a pretty extreme example here, right? Broadway and 3 wheels. When I say Broadway and 3 wheels, it's this one should be pretty clear that I mean a hand like King 5, 4, 3, and not 10 and trip 5s, right? We're not playing any trips hands. But what about some more subtle examples? Like Broadway, wheel. Well, it's very important that we look at that and we say, okay, King, Queen, 4, 3, right? King, Queen, 4, 5 would fit in that, and King, 4, 3. But we're not saying King, 4, 4. Those small pairs are not playable. There are situations where I will have a small pair in my hand, of course, but in general, when we're looking to open raise, I'm not looking at those 2 small cards and thinking this is something helping or working or even remotely good. But you can't say unpaired because pocket kings are actually good, and specifically in a steal situation. I mean, these types of hands, King, 4, 3, are great hands to have on the button. But it's important that we acknowledge that when it comes to wheel cards, we're looking for cards to be working together in making a low and straight. Those types of things are what's important to us. And in big cards, we want to have classic Texas Hold'em value to them. And there can be some subtle nuances as well, right? So ace, Broadway, wheel, which I'm raising those in quite a few spots. But there's a pretty big difference between ace, queen, 2, 3 and ace, queen, 2, 2. And there's another difference between ace, queen, 2, 2 when the 2 is suited with the ace. Right now, that second 2 is maybe kind of helping a little bit. But when I want to be playing ace, Broadway, wheel from early position, I'm likely to avoid the ace, queen, 2, 2. That's one of the worst ace, Broadway, wheels. Simply because the 2 is paired. It's a little bit on the fence. That discretion and these fine lines. Number one, if you have any questions about specific hands that maybe fall in between these cracks, definitely post them here in the forums. I will definitely clue you guys in as to my thoughts on how to play that type of hand from XYZ position. And these types of subtle nuances and little the phrase, I'll borrow it once more, in between the crack type hands that we have, we'll get much better at as we go on. For now, if you are on the fence and you are new to the game, my advice would probably be to fold. If you think that a hand may be playable, but you're not sure. If it's something more like an ace, queen, 2, 2, and I don't know if I want to raise them in early position, I wouldn't limp, but it's probably better than raising it if you're going to be bloating a pot that's a hand that's tough to play. So now on to our under the gun opening range. I think it's pretty exciting because I haven't seen much 6-max 08 laid out like this. And quite frankly, when I realized I hadn't done it, I was excited to make it. A lot of the online action is going to be 6-handed. It's going to be short-handed. And not preparing for a short-handed game when you're sitting down in a full ring atmosphere, I think, again, could really cost you. Especially live when the game does get shorthanded, A, the game is going to get better. B, you can always talk to the floor about getting reduced rake. So just keeping these ranges in mind for any shorthanded situation is going to be way better. And again, in any atmosphere where people are playing the game less frequently that way, in other words, if everyone's used to full ring and now I get to play 3 or 4 handed, it is a huge advantage for the player who's experienced with shorthanded. So first and foremost, we are obviously going to be raising all of the hands we discussed playing from early position. I put a bit of an asterisk here because I want to review it, but it's a good time for yourself to take yourself to review what kind of hands you were playing from there. Spoiler, we're basically playing the best ace-2s and the best, playing all of the very, very good ace-2s and the very, very best ace-3 suiteds. I say ace-3 suiteds, but even if I said the very, very best ace-3s, that should imply that we're looking at suited hands, double suited hands. If I'm single suited, I want a lot of work going along with it. The very, very best. We want to be super tight. But that's from before under the gun, right? This is the 3 seats before. So we're going to be raising all of those, obviously, playing all those hands. We also now want to add some of our worse ace-3s, but we still want some premium additions to it, right? I'm not excited about playing an offsuit ace-3 with little to no help, like ace-3, 9-8, rainbow, under the gun against a bunch of unknowns. That type of hand, again, we still have a lot of players left to act behind us. We, especially in a shorthanded situation where players are going to be playing wider ranges from the blinds, we don't have the type of hand that's going to be able to bet twice nearly as often. We're going to find ourselves wanting to pot control and play a guessing game on the river. Simply because the hand isn't strong enough. So we want some premium additions to go along with our ace-3 holdings. We also want to be playing our very best ace Broadway wheels. I wanted to include this because I don't think you should really consider folding like an ace, king, queen, 4 double suited under the gun because that hand is just so strong on the high end. One thing about the high end of a hand is heads up in position, high hands with a little bit of low help are great. Simply because you likely have you have a strong shot at both sides of the pot. You also just have a very strong high hand that can make some scoops. So these hands in particular, because of their multi-way playability on the high end, not having the best low isn't nearly as important when we're maybe double suited or something like that, because I'm fine betting the second nut low draw plus a nut flush draw. That's a lot different than the second nut low draw plus second pair into 3 players, right? That second nut low draw plus second pair into 3 players really needs to make trips very often to scoop. Any of this that's new to you, again, once we get into post-flop play, we will cover all of this. But the power of the high suited strong connectivity, it means we have more opportunities to scoop, and there are more board textures where our hand can take multi-way action, right? And I wouldn't hate opening king, 2-3 double suited. Those of you who watched any of my older videos working with Big Bad Babar, where we played some Omaha 8 or better and limit hold at the same time, I called this hand the Babar. He would ask me about it quite a bit, and with good reason. It's a great hand. It's probably the best non-ace hand we have. And the thing about a hand like king, 2-3 double suited is even on ace-high board textures, you can continuation bet at a pretty high frequency comfortably. And one thing most players underestimate, grossly underestimate, is how wide they're getting called. So this hand is actually going to be a value bet more often than you think when you are barreling. So we're betting as a semi-bluff, but the strength of our semi-bluff is actually a lot stronger than you think. And being able to bet with kings and have some high value with the nut low on some ace-high board textures, it's going to result in a lot more scoops than you think. Just the ultimate premium pocket kings that don't involve an ace, I think are going to be fine for an open raise in this seat. Now, we really see that from under the gun, we haven't added all too much. It's difficult to get the exact numbers and percentages on hands you'd be raising because, as I showed you, there are going to be some instances when we're going to be removing some of those holdings from there. Like ace Broadway wheel. If I put that in the Pro Poker tools, which can enumerate us for us, it's going to kind of we have to kind of finagle in there, but it's about 10% of hands in that range. It's a little bit tighter than we would in no limit hold'em, but I want to talk about what happens as we move to the button and on multiple levels. So first off, number one, we see we're adding a lot more ace wheel star combinations, and that's what we're going to continue to do, right? We started with our good ace twos and ace threes. You understand we're going to add some ace fours and ace fives and open up that other card that goes along with our ace. We also want to add more premium low holdings to our hand. We're more excited about adding, some king wheel double suited type hand to our open range than we necessarily are about, high only type hands that are playable from a lot of seats, maybe for balance purposes, and really just because, they're a little bit deceptive and have a lot of value to them. Why are we doing this? Well, the first and most obvious reason is these are the best hands in Omaha 8 or better. This is what makes a good hand in Omaha 8 or better, right? We talked about what makes a good playable multi-way hand in 08. But why is that? What gives these hands their preflop power? And when I say adapting at the table and to different situations, in this episode, I'm strictly speaking in the context of number of players at the table. And the number of players at the table is what we're using to dictate how loosely we're open raising. Now, we may find ourselves in some full ring situations where we have incredibly loose players behind us. So loose so that we don't want to fold any suited ace-2 from under the gun. And we can make those decisions and change our ranges at the table as a function of the other players, as well as the number of seats, if we understand where these hands are getting their preflop power from. So what makes these playable and what makes them good in 08? First, one thing you're going to find as we start shifting to post-flop play is that high card flops equal fold equity. And when I say fold equity, I mean mostly immediate fold equity. Anyone with a good amount of limit experience knows that it's not too often where your continuation bet is not called once, right? This was a big adjustment for me as I started to be able to see some more of my opponent's showdowns on some of the other American networks and things like that, where I was able to take a look at what people were actually calling me with once or twice. And the more heads up I play, the more it comes up too, where you see you're getting peeled on any real low draw board with any pair, any overcards, trying to make top pair, trying to make a best high, and if they have a backdoor low, it's a call. Because a lot of players are over defending, and like as we talked before with the preflop mistake of calling too much, a lot of those preflop mistakes involve what? What would be the worst hands? Hands that include 6s, 7s, 8s, and 9s. And those hands do not do well on high cards. So we can say that it's more 6s and 7s and 8s. By the way, I think 9s, it's semi-understood that they're bad cards. But defending hands like 8, 7, 7, 4, which I've been picking on, I don't know why in my mind lately, but those are just really bad hands that don't have any place to play. And one thing about a lot of those hands is they just immediately fold those flops. So in other words, I'm a lot more comfortable. The way to kind of sum this up is I'm a lot more comfortable continuation betting 2, 3, 4, 5 on a king, queen, jack than I am continuation betting king, queen, jack 10 on a 2, 3, 4. Simply because I don't want to barrel a king, queen, jack. I don't want to barrel either of those boards with either of those hands, but I also don't think I'm going to even get to bet twice. I'm sorry, I don't think I'm going to have to bet twice that often on that king, queen, jack board. So it makes sense that I want to have some low in my hand. Another hugely profitable situation in Omaha 8 or better is when you have a lock on the nut low plus a draw to the high. So this is where you can really, really punish players. Really, really punish players when you can, A, remove combos of ace-2 from their range. Now, that does not sound that easy to do, but if I'm playing against a loose aggressive player or a normal aggressive player and they have limped and I am certain that they're, and as certain as you can be at a poker table, of course, that their range does not include ace-2s, and if it does, it's incredibly discounted. When I have a hand like ace-2 with ace-2 jack 10 with spades, on a 7-8-3 with two spades, I'm pretty happy to put a lot of money in because I know that this player can never have a low, etc. That's a pretty extreme example. We'll cover some better ones. You want more maybe an uncounterfeitable low, but this kind of free roll opportunity and aggressiveness in pushing for equity, aggressiveness in pushing your equity in combination with hand reading is one of the more profitable spots and it's really like the big session thing. When you're really crushing it, these are the moments that come up pretty often. And finally, this kind of tied into that first point when I talked about the high card flop generating more fold equity, is that low hands can barrel more. And this, to me, in the states of the games today, I think you want to have a lot of hands that you can bet twice with because you want to be able to push your opponent off things. You just want to be able to bet twice. It makes sense if people are peeling the flop way, way too much. If we want to be playing pots in position and we want to have hands that can pick up equity on the turn, barreling more to me essentially means our semi-bluffs have a little bit more credibility, right? That lack of malleability I talked about in a 4-card game, that the firm nature of the fact that we need to use 2 of our cards really does create some more unique post-flop situations. So having connected, suited hands with lows to them is really important. Now, before we dive into the button range, I just want to cover one more shorthand that I'm going to use. This is, you can go on propokertools.com or you can download the software, but this is where I learned all this notation, and this is the notation I use to describe all of my ranges. And a star just means everything. The one important thing, again, is we still need to use discretion, right? If that star is really ruining the hand, if it's just a garbage hand, this isn't like a contract where we're trying to read between the lines. This is just a nice, easy way of displaying clean information. Again, though, any of these that are confusing, please feel free to post. I'm happy to clarify at any point. Now, let's talk about our button stealing range. It is an incredibly profitable spot. Heads up and 3-handed Omaha 8 or better is a very good game. And we want to be playing very aggressively on the button. We're not talking about a heads up range here, of course. This is specifically my 6 max button opening range. Opening north of about 30 to 35% of hands, probably a little bit more the more you get used to playing. And more importantly, this is the one spot where my range is really going to fluctuate, just like it should in any game, right? If you are completely new to poker, or if you are seasoned, I'll just explain it. But having tight players in the blinds means we have more fold equity, so we want to be attacking more. Having loose, aggressive players in the blinds that we know we're going to defend, we want to have a bit of a stronger range. And we know we'll be given the opportunity to play a big pot in position. So again, these ranges that I'm discussing here are all my defaults. The more we get into post-flop play, the more we're looking for situations where we're going to open them up or tighten them up. But for now, what would I be comfortably be opening my first button at the table? Now, let's talk about all the different ace-X type of hands I'm willing to raise. All of my pocket aces, even my very worst ones, I'm just going to go ahead and raise. You do block 2 of the aces, which is very relevant for post-flop play because your opponent won't be able to blindly bet with a decent low out of position on a later street. So they kind of have to play a little bit more face up. Also, these hands just have power, right? Just good to have pocket pairs. Any of my ace wheels, even including like my ace 2-2s and my ace 3-3s, the very, very worst ace wheels like ace trips, I'm not raising, but ace 2-2-4, ace 4-4-8, even, I'm probably raising stuff as bad as that. Having that low in position is incredibly powerful. Again, low means barrel. If you think about it, any 2-3-X board, we can bet that ace 4-4 on, which is pretty awesome. And when our opponent doesn't 3-bet or just calls out of the big blind and they're playing as loose and passive as they are, I'm pretty comfortable betting that ace 4 on any combination when we have the low, because I do believe my low is best. And what's nice about that is those mistakes I discussed earlier when players are calling down with their weak 2 pairs. Sometimes they feel like they're correct because they happen to get half the pot back. But, a game where you guess if you have the best hand and then are given your money back if you get it right, if I can open a casino with that game, wow, we'd be in pretty good shape, right? Now, I included ace 6 star star. Here, when we move over to ace 6 star star, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the better ace 6 star star. I'm probably going to be dumping my very, very worst ones here. What would the worst ace 6 star star look like? Ace 6 6 9, right? If I'm paired there with my 9, I think ace 9 9 6, I'm probably fine raising. Any ace pocket pair 6, 2 Broadway cards. Hands like ace 6 8 9, I don't think would be that bad to raise. I understand that those are 2 bad cards to go, that we do have the button, and there's some connectivity there. And it's the big issue with playing a worse version of a hand is if you're not able to find a fold with it on later streets. So the more comfortable you are with how your opponents are playing post-flop, and more importantly with your own post-flop game, the more excited I'd be to raise one of those hands. For now, if you're completely new, I would suggest sticking to the second tier, like kind of better ace 6 star stars. Avoid those middling cards. Maybe give yourself a Broadway with it, because a lot of times you won't be able to bet that naked ace 6 on the flop or turn, so you want a little bit more help with it. And then all of our good ace Broadways. I understand that I may be doing some duplication here, but I like to stick to all of my ace X. Like this could be included in the all Broadways. One nice thing is if you count a hand twice, it doesn't count on your percentiles or anything like that. So we've got all of our ace X hands covered here, right? We see the ace 7 doesn't really have much value. We're not really excited about playing ace 8. I'm not saying there's no situations where I'd play those, like an ace king, queen 8, double suited. I may want to go ahead and raise. So something to keep in mind, of course, ace Broadway. If we have ace king queen 10 rainbow and I'm telling you to raise that, what's better, ace king queen 10 rainbow or ace king jack 7 double suited? I mean, I would take the double suited ace king jack 7. This 7 is not that relevant for the low, but we can play a hand for an high and have some backup low potential. So we want strong coordinated aces when we're opening on the button. Understandable, right? This one's easy. Now, how about our Broadway type openings involving wheel cards, right? We said we want to be adding more wheel cards to our open raising range when we get to late position. What types of hands do we want with it? Well, if we're looking to involve some middling cards in our hand, I want my Broadway card to be highest. So I'm looking for mainly King X if I'm going to be playing some like King 9 suiteds with wheel cards, or even King 9 wheel with the suits. In other words, King 9-2-3 with 9-2 of diamonds or something like that, I think is playable for a raise on the button. Even like a King 8, that emergency low can't be that terrible. Understand that when you are this star is really, when it's not included in the wheel, and it's not a 6 maybe, it's more part of the high card value. So it's for those 8 high flops that we can bet and things like that. So we're not so excited to play them, but definitely worth it for a steal. And on that note, we can include just the Broadway wheels, right? Queen 9, Queen 8, not nearly as powerful as a Queen Jack or a Queen 10. So I'm looking to keep those other 2 cards higher. And having 2 wheel cards to go with it will give us that low side of the hand that can give us a little bit of barreling equity. And more importantly, just help us flop the nuts and things like that more often. The wheel cards are really good when you don't have an ace in there, because this way on the ace high flops, again, we need a little bit of equity. We want to be able to bet comfortably and not be able to just have to bet fold every flop. And star wheel. We want to be a little bit selective here, right? 3, 4, 5, 9 rainbow, no thanks. 3, 4, 5, 9 double suited, you got it. And even 3, 4, 5, 9 rainbow is a little bit close, but I want to be playing that against the tighter players. And obviously that star, this is a situation where that star kind of dictates itself in terms of how we view hands in Omaha 8 or better, right? It's not a wheel card, it's not a Broadway card, it's not an ace. So a 6, actually, yeah, it's probably our best one. And then 7's okay. I don't want an 8. I'd rather have a king. So you can think of it that way. And but I'm raising these hands for a steal on the button. And finally, our premium high hands. And I don't hesitate to raise my premium 3-card high hands, like a king, queen, jack, 6 double suited, things like that. Just coming in for a steal with hands like that on the button should be fine. I understand I'm talking quite a bit about the suitedness of hands, but it does make for a slightly stronger hand. We want to be raising them sometimes. And if you have an option to do something in poker, If someone said, you have to go all in with one hand, which would you pick? You would always pick the better hand. And another nice thing about that is when we do check back some flush draws on the turn on low only boards, we have some more equity, and you can have some fun lines where your opponent bets thinly for value on the river and you raise your flush for value. I know these little moments, can't really define a hand, but if you add up all these little things that can be profitable post-flop, you see what makes a hand profitable pre-flop. So we've discussed our under the gun opening range and our button range. As I said, what I want to do now is take our under the gun range and shift it over to middle position, and take our button range and shift it over to the cutoff. Why am I not just going around in that direction? Honestly, I find that the bigger jump really is from middle position to the cutoff. There's still 2 players left to act behind us as opposed to just the one. Twice as likely someone is going to have a hand to play. So it's something to keep in mind. And we still want to be relatively tight from mid position. So let's jump in. Let's talk about under the gun to middle position, right? We talked a little bit about what happens as we're moving across the table. Though, as I just mentioned, the translation from seat to seat is not necessarily linear. So what are we really adding when we come from our under the gun range with those good ace 3s, best ace Broadway and wheels? We've got all those good ace 2s in there. Well, now we're going to add our good ace 4s and our very best ace 5. So I want to suit with that ace 5. And I think I want to be particular about the ace 5s I'm playing because it is significantly worse than a 4 or a 3. So like a double suitedness to it, good connectivity on the high end. I'm not playing like my ace 9 5s and things like that. Rainbow, no, absolutely not. But some of our good ace 4s, we want some connectivity to them. Especially from earlier position, when you're trying to draw these lines between good and best, the things like pairs and connectivity really come into play quite a bit. Because of the uncertainty behind us, the fact that more players can be calling, it's something to keep in mind. So you want to be selective here. We can now add, though, some of our worse ace 3 suiteds. In other words, like some of those ace 3s plus middling cards, but we have a good suit to it and things like that, are a little more powerful now. They still have good multi-way playability. We fear the ace 2 a little bit less, and they're going to be enough for me to want to come in for a raise. On top of that, I'm not really adding all too much. I know we talked about the double suited kings, and I spoke specifically of king, 2, 3 double suited. I am not probably folding any double suited kings plus wheel combo from this seat either. I do think, though, it's best, especially when getting started, to stay tight from these earlier positions where you can find yourself out of position a lot. It just is that much more difficult, especially in a 4-card game when you don't have as much fold equity post-flop to be playing hands. So I like being tight. Now, button to cutoff. This is kind of interesting because before we were opening up our range and we saw we're adding a little bit, and now we're tightening up our range. We're actually taking out a good amount. If I had to just say what my cutoff opening range was, I would really describe it as a premium button range. In other words, the worst hands that I have on the button, when I look at them, I am not playing them from the cutoff. I know that's a very, very simple way of translating, and we're going to obviously go over the specifics of it, but it's a pretty good way to think about it, right? The same types of hands, really, right? We're really just bucketed into good lows and good lows plus Broadway combos. That's really what we're playing. I could have just said that, but obviously we want to go over it for the first time. And now we want to play the best of those. So what do the best of those really look like? When we go through this Ace X range, really not much of this changes. Now, those worse Ace Wheel Star type hands, the very, very worst, the Ace 4 4 8, Ace 5 5, 9 or something like that. I'm not going to be playing those. The very, very worst ones, absolutely not. And now we see with my Ace 6, I want some more strength to it. Give me a Broadway card, like those Ace 6 8 9s and things. Not even in my wheelhouse at this point. And again, this can all change. A lot of this changes very quickly, too. I'd say a big reason why I'm a fan of this approach, too, is because your cutoff range should be really dynamic. Because our buttons, it's not uncommon to be in a 6-max game with like someone playing 12% of hands. just someone only playing our early position range are playing 9.5 to 11% of hands, and that's it, because they only want to play ace twos and ace threes, and that's what they believe is correct, regardless of the number of players at the table. And when that's the case, you better believe, when I'm done playing, my right foot hurts from having on the gas so hard the whole time. Pardon my bad jokes, but so this is where a situation where our range is going to be very dynamic, and that's why I'm happy to draw the line between the cutoff and button, because you could say, well, this player is actually that tight. I'm going full button range here. Or this player is kind of tight. I'm going to sprinkle in some more of my ace wheels and maybe some of my ace sixes that have a suit. I like those. As I say in the end here, we want suits. Our ace, Broadways, again, those good high card multi-way playable ones, I'm still fine raising. When we start talking now about our Broadway, wheel, I have King Broadway, wheel, and that was mainly to show you that I'm not too excited about playing King 9s and King 8s and things like that from the cutoff. That's obviously a part of Broadway, wheel, but those Broadway, wheels, I want some suits, I want some power to them. The very worst ones, so what would the worst ones be? Jack 10, 2-5 with no suit. Not going to bother with it. But a hand like that, I would probably raise on the button early in a match, early in a game, no problem. That's probably just one of the worst ones, regardless. What other hands might we not consider that we used to? Pretty much something along those lines. Like, again, the worst Broadways are going to be combinations of queens and jacks and tens. Hands that get a lot worse here would be like Jack, 2-5. The more players in the pot, the worse the hand that's going to play. That is a hand that I'm very big fan of on the button, especially in a heads-up match. You've already got showdown value with pocket jacks, which goes a long way from players that can't fold any combination of four cards under an 8. And the 2-5, it's 2 wheel cards. That's great. But when you start dealing with a cutoff, that's not a hand that you can really bet into people. When you can take the information that their hand is weak and turn that into a value bet, but having to guess as to where someone is a lot more difficult than it sounds. And just finally, we're still raising our best high card hands. This is something I talk about because it's just one of the topics that people ask randomly, like, how do I play high card only hands in Omaha 8 or better? I prefer just to play everything for a raise, and in these seats, I think coming in for a raise with our best high card hands is fine. Again, a lot of what makes a hand right to play is how you play it after the flop. So as we dive more and more into post-flop play, we'll see why we don't have a problem playing any of these hands. Well, hopefully this was an educational look at our 6 max opening ranges from the 4 magical seats that we're open raising from. We will be touching on blind defense and 3-betting in the next installment. So fear not, all of our pre-flop strategies will be covered, and we'll be ready to move into post-flop play. Any questions, feel free to post them here on the video thread. If you have any questions about hands to play from certain seats, I would happily chime in. Follow me on Twitter at DCChuck. Any questions, also tweet me on there. Until next week, this is Chuck for deucescrack.com, and I'll see you on the forums.